Picture this. An auditor is like a detective standing before a massive crime scene, a company's entire financial history for the year. Their job? Find the truth. But here's the catch. They can't possibly search every single corner. So how do they crack the case? Well, they use this incredibly powerful technique called audit sampling. Let's dig in. I mean, really think about that. A big company might have millions of transactions. You're talking invoices, payments, journal entries, a sea of data. Trying to check every single one for a mistake? It would take forever. It's not going to happen.
And that's the core problem, right? This is the fundamental challenge that the International Standard on Auditing 530, or ISA 530, was built to solve. It basically says, look, we get it. In the real world of finance, checking everything is impossible. So we need a smarter, more efficient way to find the evidence we need to be confident.
So, here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to follow the investigator's trail, starting with the big problem itself. Then we'll decode some key lingo, figure out how to craft the perfect sample, see how we can go from just a few items to a conclusion about the whole thing, and finally, we'll evaluate the evidence. Okay, so let's start right there with that core issue. If auditors can't check every single transaction, what is their actual goal? Well, it's not about achieving 100% absolute certainty. It can't be. Instead, the real goal is to gather enough good, solid evidence to form a reasonable, confident conclusion. And this quote from the standard itself just nails it. The whole point is to get a reasonable basis. It's all about being smart, efficient, and effective. That little sample becomes the entire foundation for the auditor's professional opinion on a massive set of data. You know, like any specialized field, auditing has its own language, its own jargon. So to really get how sampling works, we've got to learn a few key terms first. Think of it like we're opening up our investigator's toolkit. First up, the main tool, audit sampling itself. It's pretty simple, really. It just means you're testing less than 100% of the items. Our detective isn't going to search the whole city for clues. Instead, they're going to strategically pick a few key spots to build their case about what's going on everywhere. And when we say population, we're talking about the entire pool of data we're interested in. If we're looking at sales invoices, the population is all of the sales invoices for that year. It's the entire crime scene we're trying to figure out. Now this is a biggie, sampling risk. This is the danger that's always there when you don't check everything. It's the risk that the sample you picked just isn't representative of the whole. You know, maybe our detective only looked at quiet, peaceful neighborhoods and completely missed the chaos happening downtown. It can lead to some really wrong conclusions. And sampling risk can lead to two major types of errors. The first one is the really dangerous one. You conclude everything's fine when it's absolutely not. This is a huge problem for audit effectiveness. The second type, it's more of a headache. You conclude things are worse than they actually are. This hits your audit efficiency because you end up doing a ton of extra work looking for a problem that isn't even there. So how do auditors deal with this? Well, they have two main approaches. You've got statistical sampling, which is all about the math, using random selection and probability to take human bias out of the equation. Then you have non-statistical sampling, which relies on the auditor's experience and professional judgment to pick what they think are the most important items. Both are perfectly valid, they're just different philosophies. Okay, so we've got the why and the what. Now let's get into the how. How does an auditor actually create a plan of attack and build a sample that's going to give them the reliable evidence they're looking for? Well, ISA 530 lays out 3 key steps. First, you've got to know why you're testing. Are you looking for errors in dollar amounts, or are you checking if a process was followed correctly? Second, you have to decide how big your sample needs to be to get that sampling risk down to a comfortable level. And third, you have to pick your items in a fair way so that every single item in that population has a chance of getting picked. And figuring out that sample size is a real balancing act. This table shows how different factors push and pull on that number. For instance, if you think the risk of a big mistake is high, you're going to want a bigger sample. Makes sense, right? But look at the second one. If you're doing other tests on that same area, you can get away with a smaller sample. And on the other hand, if you expect to find more errors, you've got to increase your sample size to get a reliable estimate. It's all about this dynamic trade-off. And really, it all boils down to this quote. This is the golden rule. The less risk you're willing to take on, the more evidence you need. And that means a bigger sample. It's as simple as that. So once you know how many items you need, you have to actually pick them. There are a few ways to do it. You can do a pure random selection, like drawing names from a hat. You can use systematic selection, where you pick, say, every 50th invoice. There's monetary unit sampling, which focuses on higher dollar items. And there's even haphazard selection, which sounds random but actually requires the auditor to be really careful to avoid any personal bias. All right, our investigator has gathered the clues. The auditor has tested the items in the sample. Now what? Well, this is where the real magic of sampling comes in, using what you found in that small group to make a conclusion about the entire population. Let's see how that's done. This is a step called projection. So if an auditor tests 100 invoices and finds, say, $200 in errors, they don't just stop there. They project that error rate across all the invoices. This gives them a smart estimate of the total misstatement they can expect in the entire population, all without checking every single one. But the real world is messy. What happens when you run into a roadblock? What if our investigator wants to look at a key piece of evidence, but the file's gone missing? In auditing terms, what if a company just can't find an invoice that was selected for testing? Well, the rule here is crystal clear and super strict. If you can't test it, you have to assume it's an error. If a company can't provide the evidence to back up a transaction, the auditor has to treat it as a misstatement. There's no benefit of the doubt. Okay, this brings us to the final act of our investigation. The samples have been tested, the errors have been projected across the whole population. Now it's time to weigh all the evidence and reach a final verdict. So what happens if the results don't look good? If that total projected error is bigger than the amount the auditor decided was acceptable from the start, then the sample has failed. The evidence points to a real problem. The auditor can't just sign off. They have two main options. Go back to management and say, hey, you need to investigate this and fix it. Or they have to do more work themselves, maybe by testing a bigger sample or trying a completely different test. And that's really why all of this matters so much. Audit sampling isn't just some boring technical exercise. It is a cornerstone of the trust we all place in financial statements. It's the disciplined, evidence-based method that lets an auditor give a credible opinion on a mountain of data they could never hope to examine completely. So I'll leave you with this final thought. The entire audit opinion, a piece of paper that can move markets and define careers, often hinges on the evidence pulled from a small, carefully chosen sample. It's the power of statistics and professional judgment turning a tiny selection into a verdict for the whole thing. The real question is, how much do you trust that verdict?